throughout the week. And before I introduce our speaker today, I want to encourage everyone, if you're available, there's a keynote presentation at 3 p.m. in Wakefield Hall. And we'd love to see you all there as well. And it'll be a great discussion with both of our guests, plus Dr. Fiacco from SUNY Postit, our university office, will be there as well. So without further ado, we have two fantastic guests with us throughout the week. Today you're going to hear from one of them. And please give a warm welcome to Dr. Kelly-McHale from DePaul University.
Thank you. It's really wonderful to be here, and I'm looking forward to spending time with all of you throughout the week. And Dr. McCoy is fabulous. You're really going to enjoy her talk this week, too. Today, I'm going to talk to you about teacher identity. And I know for some of you, you've read a little bit from Dr. McCoy and Dr. Lynn's book that talks about some demographic information. And I'm going to touch on that today. But I also want to talk to you about stories and how stories relate to our identity and how they show our identity in all different ways. So we're going to talk about identity in the music classroom, but also identity and the music classroom. And in 50 minutes time, we're going to try to get a lot of stuff in. But I want to start with a brief clip from a much longer clip from, let me pull that up here real quickly. I need reading glasses. I'm in denial that I need reading glasses, but I need reading glasses.
I'm a storyteller, and I would like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of the single story. I grew up on a university campus in eastern Nigeria. My mother says that I started reading at the age of 2, although I think 4 is probably close to the truth. So I was an early reader, and what I read were British and American children's books. I was also an early writer. And when I began to write at about the age of 7, stories in pencil with crayon illustrations that my poor mother was obligated to read, I wrote exactly the kinds of stories I was reading. All my characters were white and blue-eyed. They played in the snow. They ate apples. And they talked a lot about the weather, how lovely it was that the sun had come out. Now this despite the fact that I lived in Nigeria. I had never been outside Nigeria. We didn't have snow. We ate mangoes. And we never talked about the weather because there was no need to. My characters also drank a lot of ginger beer because the characters in the British books I read drank ginger beer. Never mind that I had no idea what ginger beer was. And for many years afterwards, I would have a desperate desire to taste ginger beer. But that is another story. What this demonstrates, I think, is how impressionable and vulnerable we are in the face of a story, particularly as children. Because all I had read were books in which characters were foreign, I had become convinced that books, by their very nature, had to have foreigners in them, and had to be about things with which I could not personally identify. Now, things changed when I discovered African books. There weren't many of them available, and they weren't quite as easy to find as the foreign books. But because of writers like Chinua Achebe and Kamara, I went through a mental shift in my perception of literature. I realized that people like me, girls with skin the color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not form ponytails, could also exist in literature. I started to write about things I recognized. Now, I loved those American and British books I read. They stirred my imagination, they opened up new worlds for me. But the unintended consequence was that I did not know that people like me could exist in literature. So what the discovery of African writers did for me was this: it saved me from having a single story of what books are. I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, living domestic help who would often come from nearby rural. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit, and his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them.
So I wanted to start with this because we all have a single story. And let me get this where I need to have it. And a lot of what brings us here to Crane, to music education, is a single story. It unites us. It brings us together. It makes us comfortable. But it's necessary for us to start thinking also, or to continue thinking, or to open up our thinking about second stories. So Didi Delgado, in a really interesting article called Befriending Becky, says that ultimately it's not our shared experiences, real or imagined, that will unite us. It's acknowledging our differences. And I think that this is really important because our single story contributes to marginalization in many ways, much like Chimamanda said in her, what she was saying about relying on British-based novels for creating the characters that she created in her own books as a child, but then also the way she viewed the houseboy through a single story. If you watch the whole clip, you'll hear how people viewed her through a single story when she came to the United States to attend college, assuming that because she was from Nigeria, the music that she identified with was tribal music. Again, the single story. When we're talking about teaching, there are a couple questions we really need to ask ourselves. And the first one is, who am I? Who am I as a teacher? So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to take out a piece of paper, which I see most of you have, and somewhere on a piece of paper, I want you to either write down or draw the person who inspired you to come here, the person who inspired you to make the choice to be a music teacher. Just write a name, you can write just something. Who was that person that brought you to this place or to this idea of being a music educator? How many of you wrote a high school director down? How about a parent? Anybody write someone other than a parent or a high school director, or private teacher, I should say? Yes. Elementary, which? Music teacher? Okay, anyone write somebody who wasn't a music teacher or a musician?
I wrote down
Middle school English teacher. Interesting, great.
grandparent.
Grandparent, okay. But for the most part, people wrote down music teachers, correct? Yeah, because music teachers are the ones that tend to have inspired us to do this. So we also have to consider who are those that we teach or we will teach. Who are those that teach collectively? So who are all the teachers? Who do we teach collectively? And then, most importantly, why is your identity important in the classroom? So I'm going to start with my story. I was born in Pittsburgh, moved to New Jersey, moved back to Pittsburgh. I played the flute. I ended up moving to Chicago eventually. I worked retail after college. I didn't want to teach music. I sold records. That's how old I am. Used to have standalone stores that sold music. Wasn't streaming. Streaming didn't exist. And I'm a teacher, obviously. My professional teaching life, I taught in 3 Catholic schools in the city of Chicago in 1 year. It was like getting 3 years experience in 1 year. North side, west side, south side. I got a little bit of everything. Then I moved into a suburban district, but it was a suburban district that in many ways mirrored the urban experiences that I had. We had a very large Hispanic population, large ELL, English language learner population, low socioeconomic. So stereotypical from what you might think about an urban situation. And then my current situation is that I'm a professor at a conservatory-styled school with a smaller music ed program, but I teach at a school with a really strong social justice mission. So we talk about this all the time. And and I like to do research in culturally responsive teaching and learning. So now I want to ask you, who are you? And I'm going to pass out some Post-it notes here. Okay, I'm going to make you get involved, because right now we're just kind of quiet sitting here, and I know it's early. But I'm going to give you some Post-it notes. Just take one and pass it down. And I want you to write down one thing about yourself. If you'd like to participate, there you go. One thing about yourself that relates to your place here at Crane. So something about yourself that relates to what you do here at Crane. You're welcome. And once you write that down, I'm going to encourage you to get up, and why don't we just stick them over here on this wall. So one thing about yourself, and stick it over here on the wall, and I will move my very colorful bag out of the way. Right over there. We'll just put them over here. Yeah, I should have said you don't need to put your name on it or anything like that. You know, I did buy the Post-it Note brand of Post-it Notes, and they're still not as sticky as you think they would be, or they should be. Yes, special paint to avoid these kinds of things, I'm sure. All right, now obviously you all can't see what everyone wrote. If we had more time, I'd have you go and take a good look at what each other wrote. Sorry, because I'm stepping on people. But when we look at what you might have written and what I've already shared with you, in terms of from Crane, things such as the fact that I play flute, that I teach music, these are things you expect to hear from me, right? I'm a white, middle-class woman with 3 degrees in music education who has taught for almost 25 years at this point in various contexts. I fit a very homogeneous mold, right? We all do. We all kind of have this whole thing's not working real well. That's okay. We have this very common collective thing. I know where everyone's going to stare over there now and watch. It's like fall, and the leaves are falling, right? So we have this homogeneous thing that pulls us together. We also have a second story. When we're thinking about our first story, how many of you spent a lot of time practicing scales and playing Western music to prepare yourself for auditions here at Crane and other schools of music? Yeah, you all had to audition to get in here, right? Yeah, you had to audition using a very specific style, genre of music to get in, correct? When I was an undergrad, I was working auditions. I went to Duquesne University in Pittsburgh. Duquesne, if you ever see it printed. And we were working auditions, and all of a sudden there was this buzz. This whole buzz went throughout the hallways of the second floor of the music school. Because this kid came in to audition. And this was in the 80s. And he looked like he had just stepped off of a tour bus for one of the 80s hair bands. Ripped jeans, long flowing hair, bandana around his head. I mean, he did not look like the violinists and the flute players and the clarinetists and especially the singers who came to audition. I say especially the singers because, yeah, the singers had a very specific look on audition day. In a positive way. I'm not saying anything negative. I'm just saying you've talked about, I'm sure you've talked about, Dr. O'Leary has shared with me, you've talked about the stereotypes that we assign to instruments and parts, okay? Kind of what it was like. And then this kid comes in to audition as a vocalist. and he sings Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen. He barely got through the audition before they said, okay, thank you, and sent him out the door. But does that mean that he wasn't a musician? According to the covenant, yeah, that meant that he wasn't a musician. He couldn't get in because his single story did not align with the School of Music single story. So we share that single story. We've gone through this process to become music educators that is very much set in stone. And we teach things that are very much set in stone. And that's okay. But we have to acknowledge that. We have to start thinking about that and the implications that it has for all of our students and what we're doing. So when I think about my second story personally, on the surface, I seem very typical. My second story was I really struggled in college as an undergrad. It was pretty much a miracle that I even got into a school of music because I went to a very small Catholic high school. The only music program we had was a folk group. It was run by Sister Antoinette. And I played flute in it. And that was my only ensemble experience after 8th grade. I took private flute lessons. I worked really hard to get in. But guess what happened the first time I had to audition for an ensemble? I had the only out-of-body experience I've ever had in my life. And I can tell you they are real and they happen. And it's horrifying. But I'm standing there in front of Dr. Cameron, who is still the band director at Duquesne, and I'm standing there in front of him and a grad student, and I'm playing. And all of a sudden, I'm not in my body anymore. I'm across the studio, and I'm watching myself completely and totally fall apart. Completely and totally fell apart. I don't remember leaving. I remember part of me leaving, but not the other part of me even leaving. I don't know how I got out of there. And then I was informed that I was not allowed to be in an ensemble my first semester. But I had to be in an ensemble. So they said, okay, you can sing in the choir. So then I had to work really, really, really hard to get good enough. I just didn't know how to deal with auditions. I didn't know that language. I mean, I auditioned for music school, but it was very, 8 months of memorization and work. But then when I had a week to prepare this music, I couldn't handle the stress. So part of my second story is I should never have gotten into music school to begin with. Fortunately, I was able to figure it out. I was able to adjust and adapt and change and make it work for me. But it took a while. And it took people understanding. There were people who just didn't understand, and they weren't going to understand. But it eventually worked out. So Ferrari says that teachers must be self-reflective and seek to understand their own presuppositions, the ideological prism through which external reality is sorted and understood. That's a lot of stuff, right? Really what it's saying is we have to step back and think about who we are, who our students are. We also have to acknowledge that as the teachers, we have the power. And we have the ability to shift and change. We have the ability to say that this is good and this is not good, even if we never say it out loud. I felt like I had a subpar high school experience because I didn't have the traditional high school experience. But at the end of the day, I would never trade my high school experience in for anything because I learned a degree of musical independence that I don't think I might have learned otherwise. I learned a tenacity. And so we have to remember that single story shouldn't always dictate where we are and what we're doing. So now here's the boring demographic stuff, but it's interesting and it's important to understand. So who do we or will we teach? According to this, I know it's a little bit small, so I hope, according to this, the dark blue is fall of 2004, and then the lightest shade is predicted fall of 2026. So the closest to where we are right now is the bar in the middle for ethnic groups. So we're looking at students in public elementary and secondary schools by race and ethnicity. So we've gone from 58% white students to 50, projected to go down to 45. The kindergarten class in the United States 2 years ago was the first kindergarten class where the majority of students in that class were representative of non-white populations. So it was the first time we had a majority-minority group of kindergartners. So then that's how we're projecting out to 2026 here. So our white population in schools is shrinking. Black population is staying somewhat stable, 17, 16, 15%. Hispanic population is growing. We know this. It's been growing. Asian Pacific Islander, American Indian, Alaska Native, and 2 or more races pretty much staying the same. So this is who we teach. Ken Elpis and Carlos Abril in 2011 reported that looking at the class of 2004, so I'm going back a little bit, 21% of all seniors participated in the high school ensemble. Okay, the whole ensemble number thing has been back and forth. You'll see statistics that say 18%. You'll see statistics that go all the way up to 36% as far as high school participation in music. But you know what? 98% of all students participate in general music, kindergarten through 5th grade, because it's compulsory. What we're finding is as students have an opportunity to opt out, they opt out. They're not staying with us. So now when we look at people, we look at who teaches. This is a different type of graphic here. This light blue on the bottom represents white teachers, black teachers in the middle, and then Hispanic teachers at the top. The black line across the top is other. Again, we are predominantly white in the teaching profession. Predominantly. However, we're even more in music education. So Elpis, again, because Ken really, if you ever get a chance to read any of Ken Elpis' stuff, you should, but be prepared because he's a stats guy. And he's really good with statistics, and he really knows how to look at numbers. What he did, he looked at the Praxis test. Are you an EdTPA state or a Praxis state? EdTPA. I'm sorry. So is Illinois. No, I'm not sorry, but yes, I am. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But when you look at the students who take the Praxis test, which is another gateway to licensure or certification, what Elpis found was that 86.02% of all students who took the Praxis test were white. So again, the majority of students were white. I should go back really quickly with this regarding music students. The majority of music students who participate, in high school music are, as I said, white, but they're also representative of a higher socioeconomic SES, and they also have a majority of parents who have advanced degrees. So we have a very select subset. They're also predominantly female, by the way. So we have a very select subset of students who opt to continue in music in high school. So what does all this mean? Well, I think what a lot of this means is that, bottom line, the world is not our mirror. We want to think it is. It's easier to think it is. It's easier to think in terms of what you already know, what you've experienced, where you are, where you've come from, where you will be. If you close your eyes right now and I ask you to think about, and I'm not going to ask you to answer this question out loud, but if you close your eyes and I say, where do you want to be in 10 years? And I don't know you, and I'm sorry if I knew you a little bit better, I could be a little more personalized with you. But I would venture to say, I know from my own students, when I meet them freshman year, when I ask them, where do you want to be in 10 years? Most will tell me they want to be doing what they did in high school. They want to be running that band program, that orchestra program, that choir program. And you know what? That band program and orchestra program and choir program is really important. It really is. For a subset of students in high school, it really is. We do that better than anybody in the world. We are really good at that, and we should not, I'm not disparaging it. What I'm saying is, what else can we do? Because the world is not our mirror. I did a professional development session not too long ago with middle school teachers, and the middle school they're all music teachers in a large district, and they were very upset because another teacher who is not a music teacher and not even an arts teacher began offering an elective class in their blocks on songwriting. And they were furious. How dare he? This is our place. This is my house. I felt like it was Saturday football at a university. Don't come into my house. They were so angry. So why? That's not music education. It's like, well, why is that not music education? Well, that's not what I learned music education was. That's the single story. That's looking at the world through that mirror instead of looking a little bit further. Peter Webster wrote an interesting little piece that I saw last week about a new program at the University of Southern California. Peter Webster used to be at Northwestern, now he's at USC, just trying to change. The USC has an interesting program. They run a dual undergraduate music program. They have two schools. They have a more traditional school, like we are all very familiar with, and then they have a popular music-oriented school. So people can go through a 4-year program that's based more on popular or vernacular music. And at the end of that 4-year performance degree, starting next summer, you can opt into a 1-year teacher certification program from either side. And the story he told in setting up this new program and introducing this new program to the world was, imagine a doctor, an engineer, this sounds like a bad joke, a doctor, an engineer, and a music teacher from 1917. Since this is upstate New York, I guess I can use the Rip Van Winkle thing. Fell asleep, woke up 100 years later in 2017. The doctor goes out and is amazed at all the advances and can't believe how much medicine has changed, even though the human body is the same. The engineer goes out and, first of all, computers completely blow his mind. Cannot understand 3D printers. I'm still trying to wrap my head around 3D printers. All of those things. Can't believe, because the questions are still the same. The fundamental questions in engineering are still the same. Everything else is different. The music teacher goes out, spends a day in different music classrooms, and then goes to the HR office and asks for an application, feeling that they can just step right in and teach. Now that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but not completely. We still do a lot in music classrooms that we did 100 years ago in terms of our structure, because we're paying homage to a really amazing history of music, right? We're paying homage to a Western European musical tradition for the most part. But there's more to that in many ways. So I like to talk about replication because I think sometimes we get stuck in this replication phase. We want to do what the teachers before us did. We want to be the band director who wins the VOA marching band competition. We want to perform certain pieces. We want to explore the musics that make us happy. We take our story and we try to put it out there. Sometimes, not all the time. Okay? Please remember, I'm not speaking in absolutes here. We can't. Essentialism is difficult and not appropriate with these kinds of discussions. But when we get stuck in this replication phase, this is where we go back to the very beginning, that single story. We get very comfortable telling that single story of music education. And we forget that not every child is going to fit that single story. So I like to look at this whole conundrum, so to speak, through a lens called third space. So third space tries to look at something and reimagine it. Our identities, our experiences shape our third space greatly. So I put teacher candidates' experiences within the pre-K-12 context at the top of this triangle because that's what we're talking about right now. We're talking about those experiences we've had that have shaped who we are and what we do and what we think we want to do. And then at the bottom over here on the right, information about culturally responsive teaching and learning as applied to pre-K-12 context. That's what we're going to be talking about all week while Dr. McCoy and I are here. Why is it important to think about identity when we're talking about being culturally responsive? Because we have to take that step back and we have to start thinking about what impacts the students in front of us. So now it's not just our identity in the sessions on teacher identity, but I want to bring it into also our students' identities. What are we doing in our classrooms to help enable our students to feel that they are welcome? What are we doing to help them feel that their experiences outside of the classroom fit in to our classrooms? So I'm not going to do this activity because obviously the first time I did it failed miserably, and I am strong enough to acknowledge when I fail, and I'm smart enough to learn from when I fail. So instead of using the Postit Notes, I just want you to think, what's something about yourself that maybe has nothing to do with your Crane self, your music student self, that is really important to you? I know for me, besides the fact that I had no high school music education experience outside of Sister Antoinette, who used to throw shoes when she got angry. Fortunately, I was never a target. I was also very good. But Wendy Ward was a constant target. Oh, this is streaming. Okay, well, anyway. She won't mind. But then there were things about myself that when I got to music school that we would talk about in hushed whispers. Things like, at the time, I was a really big Aerosmith fan. You didn't talk about that in the really formal, you talked about, oh, I listened to Mahler 5 tonight, and I'm going to this. And, there's this identity that you carry around, but then there's that other side of you that maybe in hushed tones, or maybe once you're not in the building, or it's Friday night and I don't want to know what else goes on, kind of things, that you're not listening to Bruckner, you're listening to Death Cab for Cutie. I had to quickly try to come up with something, right? So culturally responsive teaching and learning is asking us to take a step back and think about our students' identities. And it's asking us to think about our students' identities, not just, and this, I'm not marginalizing this next thing, not just in terms of race and ethnicity. Because what we know about race and ethnicity is that we think it's obvious, but it's not always obvious. But the thing is our identities, we don't want to boil them down to something as simplistic. Not that race and identity are simplistic, but we don't want to boil them down to just that. When someone looks at you, they see something. They see something very specific, and you have no control over how they interpret what they see. But then there are things that people don't see that can contribute greatly to your identity. And that's the important thing about being culturally responsive, is being able to say, I want to know more about my students' identities and how they impact what I'm saying in the classroom. Here's a very common, but not often talked about example. I am not dyslexic. My daughter is. My daughter is severely dyslexic. And she is a hardcore lefty on top of it, which typically contributes. It's kind of one of those correlated things. Her teachers don't realize that, but as soon as they read her IEP, they automatically assume dyslexia, learning disability, inability to thrive in the classroom at the same level as other students. Here's the catch. My daughter also has an extremely high IQ, but the school doesn't honor that. So that's one of those things that comes into this idea of culture as well. We're talking about abilities, differing abilities. How do we work with our students to better understand how they function and how we can teach them better? So we're talking about everything about you as a person that might impact how you learn. Let me go back to this real quickly. Another example of that I always draw my own personal stories because they're easiest to draw on, and I don't have to worry about somebody getting mad at me for talking about them. Because right now I'm paying the bills, so I can talk about my kids. My husband and I are paying the bills, so I can talk about them. My son, on the other hand, very, very typical. Started playing drum set in 3rd grade. Did not want to play percussion in band because he said it was boring. No offense to any percussionists out there. He said it was boring, so he played trumpet. And then in 8th grade, he broke his arm skateboarding. Big skateboarder. So couldn't play for a while. Band director said, can I use him in the percussion section? He can play the bass drum with his left hand, this, that, kind of thing. Fine, go right ahead. So he ended up back in percussion in 8th grade, goes to high school, is playing percussion in high school, refuses to march. Does not want to be in marching band. It's extracurricular, but if you're in their curricular band, you have to march unless you're in a fall sport. So my not so athletic son played soccer. Did not want to march. Had the hardest time because the rest of the percussionists were putting a lot of pressure on him because he didn't march. Told him he wasn't talented, he's not a real musician, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. The reality is he plays in a rock band. He rehearses once a week. They play out all the time. I just spent all day Saturday in the recording studio, fly on the wall, listening to them record 3 hours working on Green Day's Basket Case. 3 hours on one piece of music. Would you want to sit in a rehearsal for 3 hours and work on one piece of music? And this is a 3.5, 4 minute long piece of music. It was a great process. It was a great experience. It was really enriching. But again, I learned that his identity, he's shut out in the high school. So now as a sophomore, he's not participating in school music at all. It breaks my heart. I keep trying to get him, hoping he's going to try out for jazz band. But you know what he told me the other day? There's no way I'm going to make the jazz band because I'm not in the regular band. He said, I'll try out, but there's no way. I'm not part of that group anymore. Should we be that selective? Shouldn't we want, instead of 21% of students in the school, shouldn't we want 80%? Shouldn't we be asking ourselves, why is it that it's only 21%? And why is it only a very specific group of students who join? So when I say, I'm going to do that again, sorry. When I say band director, what do you think? You don't have to say it out loud. You probably think of a very specific person. When I say general music teacher, probably the same thing. You probably think of someone who looks like me and wears clothes with music notes on it, right? Stereotypes. Band director, tend to think of a white male. General music teacher, white female, right? So then, all of a sudden, when 6'2", strapping young man walks into the classroom as a general music teacher, your brain kind of fries for a second. And instead of saying general music teacher, signifier, general music teacher, you have to put a qualifier in front of it. You find yourself saying male general music teacher, or female band director, or black female band director. You start piling on the qualifiers. Every time we put a qualifier on, it means that we're going away from what we typically expect. So I think my challenge to you is, can we break that? Can we get to a point that when I say band director, 15 different images shoot into your head? There was a great article in, we have an online publication in Chicago called DNA Info Chicago. And it was all about a young woman who is a general music teacher at a Chicago public school who has created a little bit of a stir. She's an openly gay, she's a lesbian, who dresses in a very masculine style. She wears her hair super short. She likes to wear bow ties and suspenders, has a very definitively masculine look, identifies in a very feminine way, goes by Ms., those kinds of things. And the article was just about how the school community was embracing that. I first saw the article and I was like, oh no, oh no, oh no. But fortunately, the community is embracing her presence as a music teacher and isn't questioning her dress style and such. So as I said with qualifiers, are we going to let our single story, I'm trying to check time, sorry. Are we going to let the way we look at music and the way we look at music teaching, are we going to let that single story continue to dominate our discourse? Or are we going to allow ourselves to use identity in a way that lets us go in two different directions, that challenges us to diversify our conceptions of what it is to be a music teacher, of who teaches what, where, when, and how? So just sticking with the typical normative things we do that create a general music program or a band program or an orchestra program or a choir program, we can stay with that, but can we let our identities reshape who we think should be doing those things? One more thing to add to that. If you go north of I-80, Illinois is kind of divided by I-80, even though it's not that midpoint of the state. When you go north of I-80, which is closest to Chicago, more metropolitan area, they call it the Chicagoland area, which I think is funny because it's not an amusement park, but it sounds like an amusement park. When you're in that part of the state and you look at band directors north of I-80, there are less than 10 female band directors. 75% of the state's population lives north of I-80, 75% in Illinois. There are more students in that part of the state, more schools, but there are less than 10 female high school band directors in public schools. That doesn't make any sense in this day and age. But there's the mindset that is what a band director looks like. So can we let conversations about identity reconceptualize that? Can we let them break that, change that? And then the second thing that our discussions about identity, going back again to our student population, our ever diversifying student population, the second thing is what else can we do? Are we handcuffs to only teach the certain things that we continue to replicate? I always say, I'm at fault. It's my fault. This is all my fault. I'm not that powerful. It's really not all my fault. But I'm part of the fault. Seriously, I'm not that powerful. Really not. But I am part of that problem because I'm in higher education. I should be able to say, no, let's do something different. But I have a hard time standing up and saying that because we're in this circle, we're in this cycle. How are we going to break out of this cycle? How are we going to create spaces where the rock band becomes something that is allowed during school time? You know, kids who participate in rock bands when they put their college applications together and they get their transcripts from the high school, guess what? That's not on there. You know, I had that conversation with my son. You still have to do other activities at school, but I'm doing all this music stuff outside of school. Like, yeah, but universities don't care when they look at your high school transcript because it's not on there. I hate that I even have to say that. But why can't we do something like that? Why can't we have songwriting classes? And admittedly, there are schools that are doing this. But we have to just keep pushing. Not to take away from the band, orchestra, choir, and more typical experiences that we offer. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying to add to that, to give other opportunities, to expand the ways that kids can music. Because when you ask kids what they listen to and what they do musically, first of all, you're going to be shocked because they're very, very musical. Why can't we give them those kinds of opportunities in school, too? Why can't we create musical experiences that speak to all aspects of the child instead of just specific narrow aspects of the child? I fear that in some cases, our high school ensemble programs will become more like our high school sports programs. That they'll become so competitive and so focused on one narrow aspect that they'll lose what really makes them rich and important. And when I say important, I mean something that is important to the soul of a to the full, total experience that a student has. So Geneva Gay says that decontextualizing teaching and learning from the ethnicities and cultures of students minimizes the chances that their achievement potential will ever be fully realized. Now, Geneva is talking more in terms of this typical academic experiences that students have. But what about the musical experiences that students have? When we don't know who our students are, ethnically, racially, yes, but also those diverse musical experiences and those diverse musical identities that our students have. The ability aspects within our students, the socioeconomic aspects within our students, the gender identity and sexual identity of our students, all of those things come together and create potential that we can either realize or we can ignore. So ignorance of people different from ourselves. And remember, when different is that huge space, often breeds negative attitudes, anxiety, fears, and the seductive temptation to turn others into images of ourselves. Our identity is essential. It's who we are. We carry it with us every day. There are times that we question it. There are times that we are really uncomfortable with who we are. That's good. That's really good. Because when you're not comfortable with who you are, it's forcing you to reevaluate, and you're going to come out stronger in the end. We have to keep that in mind with the students we teach as well. Our identities are not standalone propositions. They cannot be boiled down into stereotypes. They often are, but they can't. And the identities of our students are just as important, and they require a lot of work to understand. I've had teachers say to me, and this was me, this was my situation. I taught 800 kindergarten to 5th graders when I taught elementary in Wheeling. I had 800 students. It was ridiculous. It was amazing. I learned so much. I learned that I was focusing a lot on a single story. And then I learned the importance of getting to know those students. Was it possible to get to know every single child? No, but it was possible to start to understand. It was possible. I would do playground duty. Hey, they paid me for it. It was great. I'd go out at lunchtime and do playground duty. I got extra money in my paycheck every week, but I learned. It wasn't like working. I was learning. I was interacting with students. I started realizing who they were outside of the TAs and the TTs and the little Liza Janes and all of that in the general music classroom. And that's what started my shift in how I was teaching. That's what started getting me interested in this. I realized that the students' identities were really important, and that I didn't want them to come out at the end looking like little mini versions of me. I wanted them to come out at the end being fully realized students who had really good musical experiences and could then carry that into other aspects of their lives. Thank you for your time.
Hope to see you all at the 3 o'clock keynote in Wakefield. Otherwise, on Wednesday, we'll be right back in here.
Oh, we do. That's the only one that matters, right?
I don't know whether or not